Toad of Toad Hall. Ratty, said Mole one bright summer morning, I want to ask you a favour. Will you take me to visit Toad? I've heard so much about him. Why, certainly, said Rat. Get the boat out and we'll paddle up the river at once. Toad's a good-natured animal, though perhaps not very clever and a bit boastful and conceited. But he's very amusing and generous and has some great qualities. Rounding a bend in the river, they came in sight of a handsome old house of mellowed red brick with well-kept lawns reaching down to the water's edge. There's Toad Hall, said Ratty. The stables are over there to the right, and that's the banqueting hall. Toad's rather rich, you know, and this is really one of the nicest houses in these parts, though don't tell him I told you. He's conceited enough as it is. They tied up their boat and strolled across the flower-decked lawns in search of Toad. They found him resting in a wicker garden chair, with a large map spread across his knees. Hooray! He shouted, jumping up on seeing them. This is splendid! And he shook them both by the paw. You don't know how lucky it is you turning up just now. Come with me, Ratty, and your friend also, if you be so very good, just as far as the stable yard, and you'll see what you shall see. Toad led the way, Rat following behind with a most distrustful expression. And there, drawn out of the coach-house into the open, they saw a gypsy caravan, painted canary yellow, picked out with green and red wheels. There you are, said Toad. Come inside and look at the arrangements. Planned them all myself, I did. A very excited Mole followed Toad into the caravan, but Rat only snorted and thrust his hands deep into his pockets, remaining where he was. It was indeed very compact and comfortable. Little sleeping bunks, a little table that folded up against the wall, a cooking stove, lockers, bookshelves, a bird cage with a bird in it, and pots, pans, jugs, and kettles of every size and variety. All complete, said Toad, pulling open the locker. You will find that nothing whatever has been forgotten when we make our start this afternoon. I beg your pardon, said Rat slowly, as he chewed a straw, but did I overhear you say something about we and start and this afternoon? Now, you dear good old Ratty, said Toad, don't begin talking in that stiff and sniffy sort of way, because you know you've got to come. I can't possibly manage without you, so please consider it settled and don't argue. It's the one thing I can't stand. You surely don't mean to stick to your dull old river all your life and just live in a hole in a bank and boat, do you? I want to show you the world. I'm going to make an animal of you, my boy. Somehow it soon seemed taken for granted by all three of them that the trip was settled, and Rat, though still unconvinced in his mind, allowed his good nature to override his personal objections. When they were quite ready, and the old grey horse was harnessed, they set off, all talking at once, each animal either trudging by the side of the caravan or sitting on the shaft. It was a golden afternoon, and rabbits, sitting at their front doors in the hedgerows, held up their forepaws and waved. Late that evening, tired and far from home, they stopped and ate a simple supper on the grass. Toad talked big about all he was going to do in the days to come, while the stars grew fuller and larger all around them. Then they turned into their little bunks and soon fell fast asleep. When the sun rose in the morning, Mole and Rat got up, made a fire, and washed last night's plates and cups while Toad slept soundly. And though they shook him hard and shouted, Toad just would not wake up. So Mole and Ratty trudged off to a farm to buy some butter and eggs and all the other things that Toad had forgotten to provide. After breakfast, Mole led the horse by the reins while Rat and Toad strolled along behind. They had not gone very far, however, when they heard a faint hum, like the drone of a distant bee. Then, in an instant, there was a blast of wind and a whirl of sound that made them jump for the ditch. With a loud poop, poop, a magnificent red motor car, all plate glass and shining, swept past, throwing up great clouds of dust into the air, choking and blinding them. The old grey horse reared up in terror, and in spite of Mole's efforts to hold him, plunged backwards, sending the canary-coloured caravan hurtling into a ditch. "Villains! Road hogs! Highwaymen!" shouted Rat. I'll report you! I'll have the law on you!" When Mole finally managed to quieten down the horse, Rat tried to set the caravan right. "Come on, Toad, you silly, conceited ass! Come and lend a hand!" But Toad did not answer a word, nor move from the middle of the road. So Rat and Mole went to see what was the matter with him. They found him in a sort of trance, a happy smile in his face, murmuring, "Poop, poop," at intervals. "Poop, poop. Brum, brum. Brum, brum, brum. Poop, poop." "What are we to do with him?" asked Mole. "Nothing at all," replied Rat firmly. "I know him of old. He's possessed. He's got a new craze. It always takes him that way in its first stage. He'll continue like that for days now. Never mind him. Let's go and see what's to be done about the caravan." But it was hopeless. The caravan lay shattered on its side in the ditch, its windows smashed, axles bent, one wheel off, and food and broken crockery scattered everywhere. Rat tied the horse's reins over his back and took him by the head. "Come on," he said to Mole. "It's 5 or 6 miles to the nearest town. We shall just have to walk." "But what about Toad? We can't leave him sitting in the middle of the road. It's not safe." "Oh, bother Toad." Moments later, however, they heard a pattering of feet behind them. Toad caught them up and thrust an arm inside the elbow of each of them, still staring into space and muttering something about motor cars. When they reached the town, they went straight to the railway station. There they left Toad in the waiting room and took the horse to a stable, giving instructions about the caravan and its contents. Then, catching a slow train, they eventually reached the station not far from Toad Hall. There they left the muttering, sleepwalking Toad and set off for home in their boat. Very late and very tired, they finally sat down to supper in their own cosy riverside home. Early one summer's morning, as Rat and his friend Mole were finishing their breakfast, there was a loud knock on the door of Rat's riverside home. "See who it is, will you, Mole, while I finish my boiled egg?" In a few moments, a very excited Mole returned with Badger. Rat looked worried, because he knew that Badger never visited anyone unless it was very serious. "Sorry to barge in like this, Ratty, but really something must be done." "Done?" asked Rat. "Done about what?" "Why, that silly-ass Toad, of course. At this very moment, yet another expensive motor car is being delivered to Toad Hall. He's a public menace, roaring round the countryside, terrorizing the neighborhood. He's already spent 6 weeks in hospital, you know, having smashed up several cars. We must do something, or he'll be in serious trouble with the police. Unless he kills himself first, of course." "But what can we do?" asked Rat. "You know what he's like. Once he's got a craze, he just won't listen to reason." "Well, I suggest we take him in hand. I've decided we must do something today." "Hooray!" shouted Mole. "We'll teach him a lesson he'll never forget." Well said, Mole. We'll rescue the poor animal from his own stupidity. He'll be the best behaved toad there ever was. So Badger, Mole and Rat set off for Toad Hall. When they got there, they saw a brand new shiny motor car parked outside the front door. It looked very powerful, very expensive, and was painted bright red, Toad's favourite colour. Then they saw Toad swaggering down the steps. He was dressed in an enormous overcoat, a pair of goggles, a large check cap, and a huge pair of leather gloves. "Hello!" shouted Toad cheerfully. "You're just in time to come for a spin in my new motor. Hop in!" Without a word, Badger strode up the steps and beckoned to the others. "Take him inside," he said sternly. Then, turning to Toad, he said, "Your driving days are over, Toad." And before the astonished Toad could say anything, Mole and Rat grabbed him by the scruff of his neck and bundled him, shouting and screaming, into the house. "Now then," said Badger to Toad, "you can take off those ridiculous clothes." "Shut! How dare you speak to me like this? What's the meaning of it? I demand an explanation." "Right then," said Badger. "Take them off him, you two." Mole and Rat forced a wriggling, struggling Toad to the floor. Rat sat on him, while Mole took off his motoring clothes piece by piece, and then stood him on his legs again. "You knew we'd come to this sooner or later, Toad," said Badger, pushing Toad into the study. "I'm going to give you a good talking to." And with that, he disappeared with Toad into the study. "What's the use of talking to Toad?" asked Rat. "He'll say anything, and as soon as we've gone, go back to his old ways. What he needs is a good thrashing." An hour later, a very dejected and sorrowful Toad was brought in by Badger. "Now then, Toad, I want you to promise to Mole and Rat that you will never drive a car again." "I won't promise! I won't!" screamed Toad. "It's all very well saying to you I won't drive again, but I didn't really mean it. You just made me say it. I won't promise. I won't. I love driving. There's nothing like it in all the world." "Very well," said Badger. "I feared it would come to this. Take him upstairs, you two, and lock him up in his bedroom. He's to stay there until he's said he's sorry for what he's done and promises never to drive again." "Then you'll have to keep me there forever," screamed Toad, hitting out at Rat and Mole. "I'll never promise. Never!" Kicking and shouting abuse, Toad was bundled into his bedroom by Rat and Mole, and he continued to shout abuse through the keyhole for a very long time. Then finally, all was quiet. "We shall have to take turns to guard him," said Badger. "He's obviously mad and can't be trusted for a moment." So each animal took it in turns to guard Toad's room day and night. At first, Toad was very difficult, but gradually he quietened down and amused himself by setting up 4 chairs in his room to resemble a motor car. Sitting in a front seat, and with a fixed look in his eyes, he would utter strange noises, resembling those of a car. Then, growing more and more excited, and making louder and louder sounds, he would turn a complete somersault and lie on the floor on top of the upturned chairs with a deep look of satisfaction on his face. But as time passed, Toad lost interest even in this, and grew restless and bored. Then one morning, when Mole and Badger were out walking, he called out to Ratty in a feeble voice, "Run down to the village, will you, Ratty, and fetch the doctor? I really do not think there's much a doctor can do, but one can only hope." Alarmed by Toad's condition, Rat hurried out of the room and, locking the bedroom door behind him, ran down the drive to the doctor's. In a flash, Toad dressed, stuffed banknotes into his waistcoat pocket, tied the sheets of his bed into a crude rope, climbed out of the window, and slid lightly to the ground. Striding along the road in the opposite direction to that taken by Rat, Toad came to a little town. And feeling very hungry after his walk, he marched into an inn, ordered a large lunch, and sat down to eat. Halfway through his meal, Toad suddenly stopped. In the distance, he could hear a familiar and friendly sound. The sound grew louder and louder until, with a loud poop, poop, a splendid car swept into the inn yard. Poor Toad was so overcome with emotion, he had to grab the leg of the dining room table to steady his nerves. He watched with wild excitement as the driver and passengers got out and entered the inn. Quickly and quietly, Toad got up from the table, paid his bill, and sauntered down to the inn yard. "Ah, there can't be any harm," he said to himself, "in my just looking at it." The car stood in the middle of the inn yard, gleaming in the sunlight. Toad walked boldly up to it and examined it very closely. "I wonder," he said to himself, "I wonder if this sort of car starts easily." The next moment, hardly knowing what he was doing, Toad got hold of the starting handle, gave it a brisk turn, then, as if in a dream, found himself in the driver's seat. With a great roar, he swung the car out through the yard and sped off down the high street in a cloud of dust. He was last seen hurtling into the countryside, singing at the top of his voice. But Toad's joy was short-lived. His next appearance was in a courtroom, charged with stealing a car, reckless driving, and being very rude to a fat, rosy-cheeked policeman. "Prisoner," said the judge sternly, "pull yourself together and try to stand up straight. You are a hardened ruffian and rogue. The only difficulty I see in an otherwise clear case is what punishment to give you. Taking into account the gravity of your crimes and your insolent, arrogant manner, 20 years imprisonment is, to my mind, lenient." Toad fell to his knees, whimpering and begging for mercy. Then he was dragged out of the court, handcuffed, bound in chains, and marched through the city streets where jeering crowds pelted him with carrots. Shrieking, praying, and protesting, he was led into a huge fortified castle and thrown into the deepest and darkest dungeon of all. "Keep a sharp eye on this one," said the police sergeant to the jailer. "He's a vile criminal of the deepest guilt. Watch him with your life." Flinging himself to the floor, Toad shed bitter tears. Oh, miserable animal," he sobbed. "This is the end of everything. The end of the popular, the rich and handsome Toad. What is to become of me?" Toad lay on the floor of his prison cell, crying and wailing and refusing all food. "Oh, unhappy and forsaken Toad," he sobbed. "How can I hope to be free again?" Now the jailer had a daughter, a good-hearted girl who said to her father one day, "I can't bear to see that poor beast so unhappy. You know how fond of animals I am. I'll make him eat from my hand and sit up and do all sorts of things." And as the days passed, Toad grew better and more like his old self again. But one morning the girl did not seem to Toad to be paying proper attention to his witty sayings and sparkling comments. "Toad," she said thoughtfully, "just listen, please. I have an aunt who's a washerwoman." There," said Toad. "Never mind. Think no more about it. I have several aunts who ought to be washerwomen." "Do be quiet, Toad. I'm trying to think and you hurt my head. As I said, I have an aunt who does the washing for all the prisoners in this castle. She takes the washing home on a Monday and brings it back on Friday night. Today is Thursday. Now, this is what occurs to me. If you asked her properly and gave her a few gold coins, she might let you have her clothes so that you could escape dressed as the official washerwoman. You're very alike in many ways, particularly about the figure." "We're not alike," said Toad in a huff. "I've a very elegant figure, and you surely wouldn't have Mr. Toad of Toad Hall going about the country disguised as a washerwoman." But after much soul-searching and protestation, Toad finally agreed to the plan. So, the next evening, the girl brought her aunt into Toad's cell, and in return for a few gold coins, the old lady gave Toad her cotton dress, apron, shawl, and black bonnet. Shaking with laughter, the girl dressed Toad in the old lady's clothes. "You're the very image of her," she giggled. "Now, goodbye, Toad, and good luck." With a quaking heart, Toad set out. It seemed hours before he crossed the last courtyard and heard the wicket gate in the great outer door click behind him, felt the fresh air of the outer world upon his brow, and knew that he was free. He walked quickly towards the lights of the town, not knowing in the least what he should do. But as he walked along, he saw some red and green lights a little way off, and heard the sound of puffing and snorting engines, and the banging sound of shunted trucks. "This is a piece of luck," he thought. "A railway station is the thing I want most in the world at this moment." Toad sighed contentedly and pulled his shawl about him. He made his way to the station and found a train bound for Toad Hall, leaving in just half an hour. "More luck," said Toad as he went to the ticket office to buy his ticket. Then, to his horror, he remembered that he had left both his coat and waistcoat behind him in his cell, and with them his money. Full of despair, he wandered blindly down the platform where the train was standing, tears trickling down each side of his nose. Very soon his escape would be discovered. The hunt would be up. He would be caught, loaded with chains, and dragged back to prison. What was to be done? As he pondered, he found himself opposite the engine. "Hello, Mother," called the driver. "What's the matter with you? You don't look very cheerful." "Oh, sir," said Toad, crying again, "I'm a poor, unhappy washerwoman, and I've lost all my money and can't pay for a ticket, and I must get home tonight somehow. Whatever am I to do? Oh dear, oh dear." "A bad business indeed," said the engine driver. "Lost your money, you say? Can't get home? Got kids, too, waiting for you, I shouldn't wonder." "Any amount of them," sobbed Toad. "And they'll be hungry and playing with matches and upsetting lamps and quarrelling and carrying on generally. Oh dear, what am I to do?" "Well, I'll tell you what I'll do. You're a washerwoman. Very well. If you wash a few shirts for me when you get home and send them along, I'll give you a ride on my engine." Toad's misery turned to rapture as he scrambled up into the cab of the engine. Of course, he had never washed a shirt in his life, and couldn't if he tried. But he thought, when I get home to Toad Hall, I'll send the driver some money to pay for his washing, and that'll be the same thing, or better. The guard waved his flag, the engine driver whistled, and the train moved out of the station. But as the speed increased, and Toad thought of what he would have for supper as soon as he got home, he suddenly noticed that the engine driver was leaning over the side of the engine and listening very hard. "That's very strange," said the driver. "We're the last train running tonight, yet I could swear that I heard another engine following us." "It is an engine," he called out presently, "coming along at a great pace. It looks as if we're being pursued. How very peculiar." Toad froze and, crouching in the coal dust, tried hard to think of something to do. "They're gaining on us fast," cried the driver, "and the engine is crowded with men like ancient warders waving halberds. And they're policemen with truncheons and men who look like detectives waving revolvers and walking sticks. And they're all shouting the same thing. Stop, stop, stop." Toad fell on his knees among the coals and, raising a clasped paw, cried, "Save me! Oh, save me, dear, kind Mr. Engine Driver! I'm not the simple washerwoman I seem to be. I've no children waiting for me at home. I'm Toad, the well-known, popular Mr. Toad of Toad Hall. I've just escaped from prison, and if those fellows on that engine recapture me, it'll be chains and bread and water and straw and misery once more for poor, unhappy Toad." The engine driver looked down at him sternly and said, "I fear that you've been a wicked Toad, but you're in trouble and distress, so I won't desert you. I don't like being ordered about by policemen when I'm on my engine, and the sight of an animal in tears always makes me feel queer and soft-hearted. So cheer up, Toad. I'll do my best, and we may beat them yet." Shoveling furiously, they piled up more coal. The furnace roared, the sparks flew, the engine leapt and swung, but still their pursuers gained on them. "It's no good, Toad. There's just one thing left for us to do, and it's your only chance, so listen carefully to what I tell you. A short way ahead is a long tunnel, and on the other side of that, the line passes through a thick wood. I'll put on all the speed I can while we're running through the tunnel. When we're through, I'll put on the brakes as hard as I can, and the moment it's safe, you must jump and hide in the wood before they get through the tunnel and see you. Then it's full speed ahead again, and they can chase me if they like for as long as they like. Now, be ready to jump when I say." The train shot through the tunnel, and the engine rushed and rattled and roared until at last they shot out at the other end. Quickly the driver shut off the steam and put on the brakes. Toad got down onto the step, and as the train slowed down, he heard the driver shout, "Jump!" Toad jumped, rolled down a short embankment, picked himself up unhurt, scrambled into the wood, and hid. Peeping out, he saw his train get up speed again and disappear in a puff of smoke. Then, out of the tunnel, burst the pursuing engine, roaring and whistling, her motley crew waving their weapons and shouting, "Stop! Stop! Stop!" When they were past, Toad gave a hearty laugh. For the first time since he'd been thrown into prison. But he soon stopped laughing when he realized that it was now very late and dark and cold, and he was in an unknown wood with no money and no chance of supper and far from his friends and home. So, at last, cold and hungry, he sought the shelter of a hollow tree, where, with some branches and dead leaves, he made himself as comfortable a bed as he could and slept soundly till the morning. Toad awoke in the wood, feeling cold, hungry, and very lonely. But as he sighed and blew and stared before him, he saw some bright, small thing shine and twinkle and move towards him. As it approached, a face grew up gradually around it. A familiar face. It was Ratty. "Toad," said Rat when they arrived at his little riverside home, "go upstairs at once and take off that old cotton rag. Clean yourself thoroughly and put on some of my clothes and try and come down looking like a gentleman, if you can." By the time Toad came down again, lunch was on the table, and while the two animals ate, Toad told Rat all his adventures. Rat listened in silence until at last he said, "Now, Toady, I don't want to give you more pain after all you've been through, but go on, Ratty. Don't spare me. What is it?" You mean to say you don't know about the stoats and weasels and how they've taken Toad Hall? Toad leant on the table, resting his chin on his paws. A large tear welled up in each of his eyes, overflowed, and splashed down. Plop, plop. "Go on, Ratty," murmured Toad. "Tell me all. The worst is over. I can bear it." Well, one dark night, a band of weasels, armed to the teeth, crept up to the front entrance of Toad Hall. At the same time, a body of ferrets took over the backyard and offices, while a company of stoats occupied the conservatory and billiard room. And they've been living in Toad Hall ever since. "Oh, have they?" said Toad, getting up and seizing a stick. "I'll jolly well see about that." "It's no good, Toad," called Rat after him. "You'll only get into trouble." But Toad marched rapidly down the road, his stick over his shoulder, fuming and muttering to himself till he got near to his front gate. Suddenly, there popped up from behind him a long yellow ferret with a gun. "Who goes there?" "Stuff and nonsense," said Toad very angrily. "What do you mean by talking to me like that? Come out at once or I'll—" The ferret brought his gun up onto his shoulder. Toad dropped flat on the road and bang! A bullet whistled over his head. The startled Toad scrambled to his feet and scampered off back to Ratty's as hard as he could. "What did I tell you?" said Rat. "They've got sentries posted everywhere, and they're all armed. You must wait." Just then there came a heavy knock at the door, and in walked Badger. His shoes were covered in mud, and he was looking very rough and tousled. He shook Toad by the paw and said, "Oh, this is a poor homecoming, unhappy Toad." Then he turned his back on him and sat down at the table. Presently there came another knock at the door, and in came Mole, very shabby and unwashed, with bits of hay and straw in his fur. "Hooray! Here's Toad!" he cried. "Fancy having you back again!" And he began to dance round him. "Great to see you, old chum. Welcome back." Ratty, Mole and Toad all talked at once, and the noise was simply deafening. "Frightful time, you know, absolutely frightful." "Be quiet at once." Instantly everyone was silent. Badger got up from his chair, and looking at them severely, said very slowly, "Now then, I'm going to tell you all a secret. There's an underground passage that leads from the river bank near here right up into the middle of Toad Hall." "Nonsense," said Toad. "I know every inch of Toad Hall, inside and out. Nothing of the sort, I assure you." "My young friend," said Badger with great severity, "your father showed it to me. Don't let my son know about it, he said. He's a good boy, but he simply can't hold his tongue. If ever he's in a real fix, tell him about the secret passage, but not before." "Well," said Toad sulkily, "perhaps I'm a bit of a talker. But never mind, go on, Badger. How's this passage of yours going to help us?" "There's going to be a big banquet tomorrow night at Toad Hall," continued Badger. "It's the Chief Weasel's birthday, and all the weasels will be gathered together in the dining hall, eating and drinking and laughing and suspecting nothing. No guns, no swords, no sticks, no arms of any sort whatever." "But the sentries will be posted as usual," remarked Rat. "Exactly," said Badger, "and that's where the passage comes in. That very useful tunnel leads right up under the pantry, next to the dining hall." "We'll creep out quietly into the pantry," cried Mole. "With our pistols and swords and sticks," shouted Rat. "And rush in upon them," said Badger. "And whack 'em and whack 'em and whack 'em and whack 'em," cried Toad, running round and round the room and jumping on the chairs. "Very well," said Badger. "Our plan is settled. So as it's getting late, all of you go right off to bed at once. We'll make all the arrangements tomorrow." The following night, each animal armed himself with sword, stick, and pistol. When finally they were ready, Badger took a lantern in one paw, and grasping a great stick with the other, said, "Now then, follow me." The secret passage, when they found it, was cold and dark and damp and low and narrow. So they groped and shuffled along, with their ears pricked up and their paws on their pistols, till at last Badger said, "We ought by now to be pretty nearly under the hall." Suddenly they heard people shouting and cheering and stamping their feet on the floor and hammering on the tables. The passage now began to slope upwards. They groped a little further. The noise broke out again, quite distinct this time, and very close above them. "Hooray! Hooray!" they heard. They hurried along the passage till it came to a full stop. They were standing under the trap door that led up into the pantry. "Now then, boys," said Badger, and the four of them put their shoulders to the trap door and gave a great heave. Hoisting each other up, they found themselves in the pantry with only a door between them and the dining hall. Badger drew himself up, took a firm grip of his stick with both paws, glanced round at his comrades and cried, "The hour is come! Follow me!" And he flung the door wide open. What a squealing and a squeaking and a screeching filled the air. Well might the terrified weasels dive under the tables and spring madly up at the windows. Well might the ferrets rush wildly for the fireplace and get hopelessly jammed in the chimney. Well might tables and chairs be upset and glass and china be sent crashing to the floor in the panic of that terrible moment when the four heroes strode into the room. The mighty Badger, his whiskers bristling, waved his great cudgel through the air. Mole, black and grim, brandishing his stick and shouting his awful war cry, "A mole! A mole!" Rat, his belt bulging with weapons of every age and variety, strode into battle, and Toad, frenzied with excitement, swinging his stick above his head, went straight for the Chief Weasel and sent him flying across the table with one blow. Though they were but four in all, to the panic-stricken weasels the hall seemed full of monstrous animals, whooping and flourishing enormous cudgels. And they broke and fled with squeals of terror and dismay, this way and that, through the windows, up the chimney, anywhere to get out of reach of those terrible sticks. It was soon over. Up and down the whole length of the hall strode the four friends, whacking with their sticks at every head that showed itself. And in 5 minutes the room was cleared. On the floor lay some dozen or so of the enemy, on whom Mole was busily fitting handcuffs. Badger, resting from his labours, leant on his stick and wiped his brow. "I want some grub. Stir yourself, Toad, and look lively." Toad felt rather hurt that Badger did not tell him what a fine fellow he was, and how splendidly he had fought. But he bustled out, and so did Rat, and soon they found some jelly, some trifle, a cold chicken, a tongue, and quite a lot of lobster salad. So they had a splendid supper, and presently retired to rest in their beds, safe in Toad's ancestral home, won by matchless valour, clever planning, and a proper handling of sticks.